Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Nancy had only been working at the passport office for 2 months, and she still couldn't get used to the huge crowds of irritated people in line. People were pouring in, getting, restoring, and changing passports. Poor girls could do nothing but run to the bathroom once and take a little break. And this despite the fact that the salary of the passport-issuing girls was a penny. On the other hand, Nancy had more than once noticed the flickering of bills among the papers with which some of her colleagues worked. Sometimes they also tried to give her money for a small favor, but Nancy always politely refused and silently gave it all back. At these moments, everything inside her resisted. Her upbringing and conscience would not allow Nancy to step over the line. And near the end of the day, a few girls would walk into the manager's office one by one, just for a few minutes. Nancy was lost in a guess, maybe some kind of report. Then why was she not told anything? Her question, her colleague Cindy, who was sitting at the next table, just smirked. Well, yes, report, rollback is called, and you will soon have to report as well. Nancy didn't understand, but she was too embarrassed to ask. Out of the corner of her eye, Nancy saw through the glass as a homeless man entered the room. He was wearing a dirty, shabby jacket 3 sizes larger than he was, and his hair and beard were so dusty and greasy that you couldn't tell how old he was at all. It hung down to his shoulders. He was carrying a bag with empty bottles in it. It was certainly not a sight for the faint-hearted. The man asked the guard in a squeaky voice, "Hey man, tell me, do you get a passport here? What kind of paperwork do you have to fill out?" You could tell by the guard's face that he was not at all happy to see such a visitor, but the guy overcame himself and answered peacefully, "Good afternoon. You go to the 3rd window. Get in line and wait. They will tell you everything." The homeless man sincerely thanked the guard and got to the end of the long line. People grumbled unhappily, but they did not kick the poor guy out, in fact, for nothing. He was a human being, just like everyone else. At last, the long-awaited break came. The staff sat down to lunch and tea. The older and more experienced women asked Nancy, "How are you? Getting used to it? Did you get paid yesterday?" The girl sighed. "Yes, I got, not a salary, but only tears. The boss promised me that after the internship I would be on the staff. They would pay me normally. Only something is not noticeable." And she called that ridiculous amount, which she received yesterday. Even embarrassed to bring home. "I thought I would help my mother, but so far there is no income." Betty gasped, "Nancy, you've got to be kidding me. How can you live on such crumbs? You should go complain somewhere. Otherwise, our greedy little brat will just keep ripping you off. You don't know much yet. Soon he'll make you take bribes and give him half of it. We call it kickback." Another employee shushed her. "Stop talking, the walls have ears. And don't tell Nancy what's wrong. If she starts complaining now, Ethan the bastard will fire the hell out of her." Nancy sighed heavily and thought to herself, "That's okay. I'll wait a little longer. Maybe it will somehow work itself out, and they'll give me a paycheck. It's not good to be out of work altogether either. That's how much I struggled until I found this one." The girl sank into her heavy memories and thoughts, finishing her cold tea. Nancy's parents were not wealthy people. Her mother worked as a painter at a construction site, was very tired, and after work she still had time to sew clothes to order, and still it was not much. While her father worked as a truck driver, it was still bearable, but when the girl was 5 years old, he had a terrible accident. He was transporting furniture and failed to control the car on the icy winter road. The car was crushed, and it was a miracle the father survived. He underwent 3 complicated surgeries. We could say he was being assembled piece by piece. But he could not stand on his feet, no matter how hard the doctors tried. His spine was damaged, and the man remained confined to a wheelchair. From that moment on, times were hard in their family. The father fell into a prolonged depression, began drinking, and there was a lot of cursing and tension at home. Stephen was angry and snapped at everyone, even though his wife and daughter did their best and more. After all, moving a large man from a bed to a chair was extremely difficult, not to mention taking him to the shower. Since the family lived on the top floor of a panel building with no elevator, the father was trapped in the apartment for many years. It was impossible for him to go outside without the help of his neighbors. My mother was also exhausted to the limit, counting money from paycheck to paycheck and cursing her miserable fate. Therefore, she had no time to show tenderness to her daughter, and there was nothing to pamper her either. Laundry, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of her sick father fell on her fragile, girlish shoulders early on. It was taken for granted. And in fact, she was a child, and she wanted, like all normal children, to go for a walk in the yard with friends, to go on excursions with her class, to go to the movies, or to eat delicious ice cream. Kind neighbors and acquaintances gave their family shabby baby clothes that their own children had grown out of long ago, and often they were not the size of a skinny child. Nancy wore them to school. Her classmates often mocked her, did not want to be her friends, and shunned her in every way. They teased her about being poor and destitute. Especially Nasty William. He was the son of a businessman. He was allowed to do anything. He was the one who had turned the whole class against the poor girl. Nancy was always jealous of the kids when they took the hearty ham and cheese sandwiches, chocolates, and bananas out of their backpacks. She had an oak tree cookie in her backpack, which she had to try to chew. Nancy did well in school, especially in the sciences. The teachers treated her well, pitied her in their own way, praised her for her achievements. Her class teacher, Helen, sometimes even put an apple or a tangerine in her bag. Her teachers thought she had great potential and should go to university, but her mother dismissed the idea. "Are you kidding me? What university? I can't wait for my daughter to find a job so she can start helping me. We spend almost all the money on my father's treatment, and he takes expensive drugs all the time. I can't afford university either." Nancy, of course, was very hurt. She cried softly, but she knew her mother was right. They simply could not get the money to continue their studies. So after graduation, she decided to go in search of a job. It was not an easy job. No one would hire her without experience or education. She felt hopeless. A young girl could not be a janitor or a cleaner, after all. 3 months later, she arrived at the passport office looking for a job, completely by chance, without any hope of success. The supervisor, a balding, unpleasant fat man, Ethan, looked at her high school diploma with honors, looked at her intently, and then suddenly said, "So, honey, you don't have a specialized education. You don't have any experience, and you're certainly not a great candidate for a job. Although I can see that you studied well." Nancy lowered her head and prepared to hear a hackneyed phrase, "You're not right for us or we'll call you back." But the man suddenly continued, "Well, Nancy, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put you on probation as a passport keeper. I'll pay you 2/3 for the time being, and when you join the staff, I'll pay you like everyone else, 100%. All right, let's see what kind of worker you are." Nancy was just glowing with happiness. "Of course I do. I won't let you down. When can we start?" Ethan replied, "Fill out your papers and go to work on Monday. The girls will teach you what to do. Make sure you don't miss any work. I know you young ones." As soon as the door closed behind Nancy, a satisfied Ethan rubbed his hands together happily. That's good. Of course, it would be nice to put his own man in such a money position, but that's all right. He'll learn. If anything, my girls will tell me how much to keep and how much to give me. After all, Mercedes are expensive nowadays. You'll have to save for longer. And if the fool thinks something bad, I'll kick her out, and that's the end of it. Nancy ran home as if on wings and announced the good news from the doorstep. "Dad, Mom, I finally found a job. I got a job at the passport office as a trainee. It's true that the salary is not much yet, but they promised to raise it later." The elderly woman even cried and hugged her daughter. "Thank God. You're my good girl. It's okay. The main thing is to catch on. It won't be a penny too much, no matter what. I've been working myself to death. My legs are aching all the time, and my arms hurt." Stephen said sadly, "You forgive me, Nancy. It's all my fault. Your mother has been working like a curse for so many years. She can't see the light of day, and you didn't go to school either. You haven't seen a normal childhood, And now you can't even get up from your desk and go to work. Sooner I would be gone, not to torment you all. I am fed up with such a life." The girl ran up to her father and hugged him tightly. "Don't say that, Daddy. It's not your fault you had an accident. It's okay, we'll get through it together. I love you, so don't think bad thoughts." I'm about to start crying. The first week of work, a very attractive young man came to see Nancy. A tall, sturdy brown-haired man with green eyes. He was dressed expensive and stylish. The Rolex watch on his hand alone was worth a wow. He came to get a new passport to replace the one he had recently lost. The guy joked around, complimented Nancy. "Look at all the beauties who work here. You can't take your eyes off them. Young lady, aren't you a model?" After all the evidence is there. Nancy laughed, flushed, and handed him a new document. "Get your passport, you joker." The guy wouldn't let up. "I'll take poison from your hands. My name is Frank, by the way. What's yours, pretty lady?" She was even more embarrassed. "I am Nancy. You embarrassed me." The queue at the back of the queue began to rumble, and indignant cries were heard. Mother sighed, shook her head, and walked out silently, then shouted to Nancy from her room. "Daughter, come and see what I have to show you." The girl wandered off to watch without any enthusiasm. My mother was holding a beautiful piece of very expensive blue fabric in her hands. "Do you like the material? Do you want me to make you a dress in an hour? You'll look beautiful. A client brought this for a suit. There's plenty more. You're skinny, so there's enough for you." Nancy glowed and threw herself around her mother's neck. "Thank you. The fabric is very beautiful. But can I have it short and tight, and darts on the sides here?" she gibbered. Frank picked Nancy up exactly at 8 o'clock, as arranged, and simply marveled at her as she came out of the entryway. She was so beautiful. Wheat-long curls flowed beautifully over the shoulders. A dress fit like a fit and just emphasized the perfect figure, shading the blue eyes on the cheeks flushed and minimal makeup. Just a doll, a sweetie. All evening Frank was near his chosen one. While the session was going on, he kept touching her hand, trying to get closer to her. The girl smiled, did not pull away at all. Then they went to a cafe, ate ice cream, drank coffee, and talked a lot. It turned out that Frank was the son of Livingston, a well-known businessman in the city, worked in his father's firm, had his own luxury car, and an apartment in the city center. The guy had graduated from a prestigious university, enjoyed life, and was very confident. Nancy was a little embarrassed at first. She was embarrassed to talk about her sick father, her modest life and difficult childhood. But she did not lie. She told everything about herself as she was. She decided that if anything, it would be better to break up immediately, so that it would not be so offensive. But to her surprise, Frank took it calmly, sympathized with the fact that Nancy's father was sick, and her life was so difficult. Then he added, half-jokingly, "Well, don't worry, when you marry me, you'll be Madame Livingston. You'll get on with your life." The girl laughed, regarding it as a joke, but she was very pleased to hear that. Frank drove Nancy home, and at parting suddenly kissed her passionately, pressing her to him as hard as he could. The girl became dizzy from the excess of feelings, and suddenly unceremoniously began to try to get under her dress. The girl began to zealously resist. She did not like this behavior suitor. Nancy shoved him away and slapped him across the face. She screamed, panting with anger. "You know what? This is too much. I understand that you're a well-off guy, and you probably had a lot of girls, but that doesn't mean that I'm any of them. I haven't had any men before you, and I won't have any until after I'm married. Is that clear? If something doesn't suit you, let's just say goodbye right away." Frank was taken aback and rubbed his cheek. "I got it. You don't have to fight right away. It's the first time I've ever had a girl hang herself on my neck. But I got dumped like a kid in the yard. Don't think I'm not some rapist. If you don't want to, you don't have to. What's the big deal? You can't touch me. Goodbye." They said goodbye, and Nancy ran into the entryway. The girl was upset, realizing that Frank would probably never call her again. She spun around in bed until morning. There was no sleep at all. Something unimaginable was happening to her. As soon as she imagined those strong hands on her waist and that passionate kiss, Her heart began to burst out of her chest, and millions of butterflies fluttered in her stomach. What's the matter with me? I have to go to work tomorrow, and I still can't sleep. What if Frank is offended and won't call tomorrow? Maybe I shouldn't have been so harsh with him. I'm such an idiot. But it's so nice to have him around. Only a day we know each other, and it seems to know each other forever. And what sensual lips he has. Here we are, I think I'm in love with him. Frank, on the other hand, was furious at first, his cheek burning, cursing to himself. What a wench. Everything turns out only after marriage. It's not like the caveman age. I had such beauties before her. Everyone was envious of her, and here, she's playing hard to get. Oh, forget her. Put her out of my mind and forget her forever. But forgetting for some reason did not work. As soon as Frank closed his eyes, the image of Nancy, her sweet doll face, innocent blue eyes, and such sensual lips appeared at once. He wanted to see the girl again and again. It was an attack of some kind. He was angry. Why do I keep thinking about Nancy? Was that the end of the world? I've never felt that way about anyone before, that's for sure. I can't get that stubborn girl out of my head. Eventually, after barely making it through the evening, he called Nancy again to apologize. Hello, Princess. I'm sorry about the other day. I was wrong. It wasn't right. It won't happen again, only if you want it to. What's up, world? Shall we go out tonight? I'll show you a very interesting place in this city. From this point, the whole world is at your fingertips. You'll love it. Nancy was delighted that Frank had called and immediately agreed. I don't mind. Peace. I'm on my way. What time are you coming over? From that day on, she and Frank began a relationship. They dated, they went out a lot, they shared everything. Nancy was head over heels in love. Frank seemed to her to be the epitome of the male ideal. He was handsome, smart, well off, gentle, every girl's dream. In addition, Frank was courting very nicely. They rode the cable car and kissed for a long time at a huge height. The sensations were simply inexpressible. They visited exhibitions, presentations, and fashion shows. For Nancy, all this was strange, interesting, and unforgettable. Frank knew how to create a holiday out of nothing. For example, even on those evenings when they didn't go anywhere, the guy bought burgers and coffee. They sat on the roof of a skyscraper and solved the mystery of the stars. They tried to guess the planets and see the bucket of the Big Bear. Or they rented a small yacht and went for a ride on the river. It was so great, a splash of water, a breeze, and the boyfriend you love hugging you tightly. Such happiness and such intense feelings of happiness Nancy had never felt before. She wanted to laugh. Everything inside her was singing, and it seemed as if she was floating above the earth instead of walking. Frank, in fact, hadn't quite figured himself out yet. He liked Nancy a lot, no doubt. He was drawn to her like a magnet, but her condition didn't quite suit the young man. He was certainly not ready to get married yet, and he wanted a more intimate relationship more and more. On the other hand, after Nancy's words, he could say this was the first time he had thought about the matter at all. Why didn't I really get married? She's a good girl. She's smart. She's not going to walk right and left. I'm 25 now. Well, we'll see. So reasoned the guy, hoping that over time, the girl herself will not hold out and the fortress will collapse. Soon there was going to be a big celebration in the Frank family, my father's anniversary. The celebration took place in an elite restaurant, and important guests were invited. In addition, the Frost couple and their daughter will attend the celebration. They were prominent and influential people of the city. The father of the family, Sean, owned a chain of construction stores and recreation centers, and had access to the highest offices. There was even talk that he was the first candidate for governor of the region. He and his wife had only one daughter, Violetta, who went to study in France right after high school. At a recent social gathering of mutual acquaintances, Father Frank and Sean decided to match their children. Why? The couple would be a glorious couple of the same circle and status. As they say, money goes to money. Violetta was supposed to fly in from Paris the day before the celebration, so the parents decided to introduce the young couple at the party. Knowing Frank's independent and rather sharp character, They decided not to say anything to him directly. By the way, they told him about their daughter Frost, how clever and beautiful she was, and what a great fortune she would inherit from her father. Frank didn't particularly get into his mother's chatter, thinking about his own things, but successfully inserted lines, making it seem as if he was keeping up the conversation. While his parents were preparing for the reception and working out a plan for the matchmaking, Frank, unaware of anything, decided to invite Nancy to the reception, and at the same time to introduce her to his parents, since it was such an opportunity. Nancy was reluctant. She wouldn't go. Frank, this is embarrassing. If it were your birthday and you invited me, but it's your dad's party. What if I'm not invited? I mean, who am I going to be there? Besides, it's gonna be so big, I'm scared. The guy objected, as always, in his jocular manner. So, future Madame Livingston, are you refusing to go out with me? Have you changed your mind about becoming a businessman's wife? You'll have to do that a lot. You've got to start sometime. Nancy was pleased to hear that, which meant Frank was really serious, so she backed down and agreed. The girl was preparing very carefully, went over the internet, rehearsed at home with her mother how to use all kinds of strange cutlery at the restaurant, so as not to embarrass herself, God forbid. I was rehearsing my father's congratulatory speech in front of a mirror. I was so nervous. Together with Frank, we chose a gift, expensive cufflinks with an inscription. My mother helped out with the dress again. The dark maroon silk was insanely expensive, but the dress turned out just gorgeous. And the shoes were found in the mezzanine, even though they were many, many years old. Daughter, I only tried them on a couple of times, while I was waiting for a special occasion, and could not go anywhere in them. Let's have a look. Nancy almost cried. Mommy, don't make it up, please. Your shoes are over 30 years old. I'd rather go barefoot then. When they opened the dusty box, the daughter gasped. In it lay absolutely stunning pump shoes on a high, thin stiletto heel, dark maroon color. Fashion had once again made a circle of decades long, and these shoes were once again at the very top. The outfit was ready. At last the day arrived. As the young couple entered the restaurant, Nancy was stunned. How beautiful it was all around. How many people. All dressed up and important. It was scary. She felt like a Cinderella at the feast. It seemed to her that now it would strike 12, and the carriage would turn into a pumpkin, and she would be back in rags and lose her prince forever. Frank held her tightly by the arm, reassuring her, and she was shaking. The boy led her to her parents. Mom, Dad, meet Nancy, my fiancée. Molly smiled in surprise. Son, who is this girl? You didn't tell us you weren't alone, Molly said in a pallid voice, clenching her hands nervously. The guy was a little embarrassed. Well, I wanted it to be a surprise. Mom, aren't you excited? My father stood there as if struck by a thunderbolt, and he just whispered, Yes, my son, your surprise was a success. Mom was still smiling pretentiously. Oh, come on, honey, you're a big boy now, and you can have all the fun you want with whomever you want, and as long as you want. It was so humiliating for Nancy, as if she had been spit in the face. Things were heating up. Nancy hesitantly began her memorized speech. Dear Richard, allow me to congratulate you on your anniversary and wish you. The man grimaced and did not let her finish, stopping her with a gesture, took the gift from his son's hands and said dryly, Thank you very much, I understand. Have a seat at that table over there by the window. He stepped aside abruptly and began to dial Sean's number, frantically trying to think of something to tell him. It turned out that the Frosts couldn't make it to the party today. The head of the family wasn't feeling well. Frank's father breathed a sigh of relief. Making such an enemy was no joke. Nancy's mood was completely ruined, as if a pile of garbage had been poured on her, though, in fact, almost nothing had been said. But she felt with every fiber of her being that she was not welcome here at all, and was considered just another girl for the son's pleasure. Frank, on the other hand, was easygoing, chatting with the guests, joking around. Throughout the evening, no one paid any attention to Nancy or tried to make conversation with her. Only once a slightly inebriated, respectable man came up to her and said cheerfully, Don't be sad, beautiful, it's a holiday. Why are you so sad? You don't dance at all." Nancy tried to force a smile. It didn't work very well. Then she answered honestly, "I guess Frank's parents didn't like me. They didn't like the usual passport keeper. I'm a stranger here." The man winked at her and replied, "Don't worry, everything will work out, as long as Frank loves you." But Nancy felt it wouldn't work out, and for good reason. After her father's anniversary, Frank had changed a lot. He had become distant, like a stranger. They seemed to keep seeing each other, but now they were seeing each other less often, and there were constant misunderstandings. The groom became irritable. He answered her questions very reluctantly and kept silent, explaining that there were unforeseen difficulties at work. The girl was worried, secretly cried into her pillow at night, but was afraid to ask her what had happened and why he had started behaving this way with her. After all, she loved the boy very much, and what if he really decided to leave her? She wondered what her parents had said to him. The parents really worked their son over quite seriously and kept saying the same thing. "Son, listen. Your Nancy is no doubt a bright and beautiful girl, legs from the ears and all that. She may even be a good person, and no one forbids you to have fun with her. It's a young thing. But to say that this is your fiancée or, God forbid, your future wife, it's ridiculous. What is she? An ordinary passport keeper. Her father is an invalid. They live as poor as church mice. What kind of future can there be with her? You should be smarter and plan your life years in advance. Look out for girls from our circle, like Violetta Frost, the businessman's daughter, or Julia, the heiress to the Evans banker. That way we will increase our capital, and you will not need anything until your old age. Think well, don't be so hot." Frank defended Nancy in every possible way at first, but the seed of doubt, having fallen on fertile ground, was gradually germinating. The boy began to wonder if he had to rush into it. Only one person in their family, his father's brother, the politician and philanthropist Thomas, tried to siege Frank's parents. "My beloved brother, haven't you forgotten how we all came from the bottom? How we lived in a broken-down dormitory, shared one toilet per floor, and cooked fried potatoes in a shared kitchen. And who were our parents? Dad's a locksmith, Mom's a nurse, and you got rich and suddenly became royalty? And your wife isn't the daughter of an oligarch. So why are you all so upset with this poor girl now? Personally, I liked her very much. Pretty, modest, clever. And you, Frank, you fool, don't listen to anybody and do what your heart tells you to do. Otherwise, you'll get married like a sheep to someone you don't love. In a couple of years, you'll hate her so much that nothing will be nice. So think hard and live with your mind, not with your parents." Recently, another important event occurred in the girl's life. Upset, Nancy was walking home, her thoughts heavy in her head, when suddenly a faint squeak could be heard from the bushes. The girl reached into the wilds, tearing the last of her tights, and pulled out a frightened little kitten. He was skinny, his ribs were glowing, his head was shaking, and fleas were jumping through his sparse fur. Nancy spun the baby around and thought, "My God, how scary." She put him in her pocket and carried him home. She couldn't just leave him like that and walk by, as if nothing had happened. Her heart shrank with pity for this defenseless baby. She was worried that her mother would obviously be against it. They would throw it away, no matter what. When she entered the apartment, she went determinedly into the kitchen, heated up some milk in a bowl, and poured it into a saucer. She let the kitten get closer and poked it with her muzzle. It began to drink greedily. It was choking on it. In the meantime, she found an old, unwanted warm sweater and laid it on the floor in her room. She made a kind of tray. Mom grimaced in horror. "So, daughter, where did you get this little runt, and why did you bring him home? We can barely make ends meet ourselves, so why do we need another mouth? Feed him and take him out to the yard. Maybe someone will take him away. We've got enough to worry about, and you have to take care of this one too." Tears came to Nancy's eyes, and she answered in a trembling voice, "Mommy, let me keep him, please. It's not Scallywag, it's Jack. I'll give him a bath and fly away, but what a warm lump of happiness will always be with me. There must be some joy in life. I've never asked for anything, and now I'm begging you, have pity on him." Then my father intervened in the conversation and said sharply, Let her stay, daughter. It won't eat us. It's not a cow. It'll be more fun for me. Mother, don't be angry. Look how funny he is. Come here. They say a ginger cat in the house is lucky. You didn't get him for nothing. The kitten immediately climbed into the man's arms, curled up, purred, and fell asleep. For the first time in years, Nancy saw Daddy smile. He wasn't clenching his teeth in pain or squinting in anger at himself, but he was smiling blissfully and peacefully. It was worth it. Mom waved her hand. No, you'll have to clean up after your treasure yourself. It would seem, well, what can decide in life such a little lump? And it turns out everything. The atmosphere in the family became much warmer. Now in the evenings, Daddy played with Jack. He even taught the kitten to bring a ball in his teeth. The girl bathed the new tenant, got the fleas out, and the kitten became well-fed and very fluffy. When Nancy was upset, Jack would immediately start a session. He climbed on her chest and petted her until her heart really felt better. Even my mother, who was always sullen and tired, couldn't help laughing at these family antics. Nancy was brought out of her musings by the voice of an employee. Hey, you fell asleep. The break's over. Run to the office. People are waiting for you. Nancy hurried to her workplace and began taking people in. Soon it was that bum's turn. He shuffled, stomped, smelled unpleasant. The women wrinkled their noses and snorted. Nancy couldn't help it, so she invited the man to sit down and started asking him how she could help and what he wanted. It turns out that he lost his passport years ago and wanted to restore it. Strangely enough, the tramp's voice was familiar, as if she had heard it somewhere before. She thought to herself, it can't be. It probably just sounds like someone else's familiar. The girl was patiently explaining to the tramp what documents must be collected for this, where to make a photo, and that he would have to pay a fine for the loss, when the head of the office burst in and from the threshold began to shout. What's going on? Who let that stinking bum in here anyway? Where's our valiant security guard? I'm gonna kick his ass. Get out of here. Suddenly Nancy, not expecting her own courage, stood up for the tramp. Why are you persecuting him? You can't do that. He's a human being too. And he only came to find out how to restore his passport. What's wrong with that? Ethan became even more furious. Why are you still opening your mouth? Where does a bum get the money to restore his passport? Just to mess with people's heads. The room already stinks. You can't breathe. It's impossible to be here. Get out, I said. The poor guy began to make his way toward the exit, and Nancy walked up to him and shoved a piece of paper in his hand. Take this, I gave you all the details here, and some money for bread. I'm sorry, there's no more. The warden went berserk and attacked Nancy. Look at you, what an intercessor. Are you going against my will? Fuck you too. You're fired. The girl cried and said through her tears, What for? I just helped a man. You can't do that. Just as Ethan opened his mouth to unleash another round of anger on the stubborn trainee, suddenly, in front of an astonished audience, the homeless man began to remove his wig, peel off his mustache and beard, and threw his dirty jacket on the floor. Everyone froze, and the man smiled and introduced himself. The play is over. Curtain, I'm your new mayor, Thomas Wallace. You're welcome. Is this how you work with the people, Ethan? You got the staff scared. One brave girl was not afraid to stand up to you. I know all about your dirty dealings. They've been complaining about you for a long time. You take bribes through your employees and deliberately delay documents. Now I'm personally convinced that I didn't do it all for nothing. I have a lot of questions for you. Let's go into my office. All right, let's get back to work. And you, my dear young lady, of course, are not fired. I promise you that. Ethan quickly realized that this was a hot-button issue and started making ridiculous excuses. Thomas, this is just a misunderstanding. I didn't understand the situation. Nancy, I overreacted. Please forgive me. But it was too late. The mayor wouldn't listen, showed him to the door, and the men left. Everyone exhaled, and Betty said, You're really something, Nancy. We didn't expect that from you. You weren't afraid to go up against that punk, and you're on the plus side. What's going to happen now? I wonder. Maybe they'll finally get rid of Ethan and his friends. A week later, the news spread through the city, and the new mayor began to check all structures, based on complaints and requests from residents. So a lot of heads flew for machinations and shady dealings, which immediately came to light. And each time he appeared in the organization incognito, so that the cunning employees did not have time to prepare and clean up their sins. Ethan and his trusty associates were fired with a bang. The police were now dealing with them, and Nancy was promoted and given a decent salary. Now all the employees respected her very much for her courage and honesty. She also did not take bribes. She kept order and worked with integrity. But the most important change in her life came a little later. That evening, Frank entreatingly reported, "Nancy, we're going to my parents' house for dinner tonight. They're really looking forward to seeing you there. Get ready to go." The girl was really frightened. "No way. It was enough to meet you in the restaurant at your father's birthday party. I could barely get over the warm welcome. I'm sorry, but I'm not going." Frank suddenly put his arms around Nancy and whispered, "Don't be afraid, silly. Everything will be all right. I know it. Let's go. Please, please. For my sake, you're in for a lot of surprises." She really didn't want to go through the same negative emotions again, but her relationship with Frank had been strained lately, so maybe this would help them get back together like before. In the end, she thought, what will be, and started to get ready for the meeting. To her surprise, Richard greeted her very warmly. "Hello, Nancy, come in. We're almost ready for dinner." The astonished girl sat down at the sumptuously set table, and there were all kinds of treats, half of which she had never tasted. Frank's mother affectionately began, "Nancy, girl, we're sorry that my husband and I didn't accept you right away. You could say we ignored you. That's a sin. I guess we did get a little cocky. But Thomas, Sam's brother, who did the inspection at your passport office, told us all about you. What an honest, kind, helpful person you are. So we thought we ought to make a relationship. If you and Frank really love each other, so be it. We don't mind. We will help in any way we can support you." Nancy was taken aback by these words and blushed. "Thank you very much. That's very nice. But I didn't do anything wrong. I just helped the man." Lucky Frank also got up and ran out somewhere, then came in, opened a beautiful box with a mysterious face, and said, "Nancy, my love, I ask for your hand in marriage. I must be honest with you. I was also guilty before you, and I even had doubts about whether it was too soon for me to get married. But then I suddenly imagined that you and I broke up for good, and I realized that I do not need anyone but you. I want us to live a long and happy life together. Marry me. You'll be Madame Livingston, just like I promised. Well, do you accept? 5 minutes to think about it. Time to go." And he winked cheerfully at the girl. Tears came to her eyes, and Nancy answered in a shaky voice, "I agree. Only I'll still help my parents, because my dad is handicapped and very sick. Do you mind? Also, I have a kitten, Jack. Can I take him with me?" Richard hastened to reassure the girl. "Well, of course, we'll help your father. What are you talking about? We're not strangers now." The very next week, Nancy and Frank's parents met and talked heatedly about their upcoming wedding. Nancy's mother was very worried and lamented. "My dears, of course, I'm very happy for my daughter. Frank is a great guy and Nancy loves him very much. I can see that, except we don't have any money for a big wedding. You see how we live. We can't even buy a normal wheelchair for my husband for so many years, and we can't afford to pay for a wedding. I have been working all my life on my own, even though I retired long ago. Maybe they should just get married quietly, and that's it. Why this show?" Richard responded decisively, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of the banquet, the dress, and the rings. It's not even up for discussion. You understand, it's not about showing off and not about surprising anyone with something. I want this day to be remembered by the young people for the rest of their lives." Frank's mom added, "For any girl, a wedding is the most exciting and important event in life. So this is our gift. And also, we have a great apartment in a bedroom community, purchased on occasion. We'll also give it to the young people. Let them live there happily." The wedding went at the highest level. A beautiful restaurant, lots of guests, and congratulations. The Frost family also attended the wedding, and as it turned out later, their daughter Violetta was not happy about her father's idea. She already had a boyfriend she loved in France, whom she was going to marry, and was happy that it worked out that way. Sean was angry at first, but then quickly cooled down. Young people, what could you do with them? Richard kept his promise and bought an upgraded wheelchair for Nancy's father. Stephen, of course, attended the celebration and was perfectly happy. For their first wedding night, Frank rented a swanky suite at the most expensive hotel in town. They drove there in a huge white limousine. Nancy was trembling with excitement. She was even scared. She was amazed at how beautiful it was. Frank opened the champagne, handed the glass to his beloved, and whispered softly, "To us, to our new family. I hope I don't get slapped in the face like I did back then. Come here, my kitten. My God, you're trembling, aren't you? Don't be afraid, little one. I'll be gentle." The night was magnificent and unforgettable. A happy Nancy could not sleep until morning, listening to the measured breathing of the most beloved man. Frank hugged her so tightly even in her sleep, as if he were afraid she would evaporate. The newlyweds moved into a new apartment. Nancy was packing and wanted to take the kitten with her. But then the father started asking, "Nancy, daughter, leave me Jack. I'm so fond of him. It's been so lonely and empty without you in the apartment. At least let him brighten up our loneliness." The kitten, as if it understood what we were talking about, immediately climbed into the man's lap and began to cuddle, playfully moving his paws. Nancy was sorry to part with the pet, but she saw how happy these two were together and did not dare to take Jack. Nancy and Frank's family life didn't get on well right away. There were resentments at first, and there was an adjustment of personalities. But after a while, everything calmed down. Frank was surprised how great it turned out to be to rush home, knowing that there is a beloved cooked a delicious dinner. Everywhere is clean and comfortable. The couple began to dream of having children. But somehow the long-awaited pregnancy never came. Nancy was nervous, went to the doctors, who reassured her that everything was fine and all in good time. Soon something happened that turned the newlyweds' lives upside down. The couple was lounging in bed. It was a day off. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Frank whispered, "We won't open. We're not here." I began to kiss my beloved, but behind the door there was a stirring, then footsteps down the hall, and then a squeaking sound. The disturbed girl jumped out of bed. "Frank, there's someone there. Let's go look." When they opened the door, they were both taken aback. There was a cradle with an infant on the doorstep. There was no one there. The baby hissed and began to cry. Nancy gently took the baby in her arms and began rocking her. There was a note under the mattress. "Frank, this is your son. His name is Chuck. He's 6 months old. Remember who you had a fling with. I'm sorry, but I'm going abroad. I have a contract and the baby doesn't fit into my life at all. So do what you want with him. It's your son too." At the bottom is signed Miranda. Nancy was speechless, just staring now at Frank and now at the baby, waiting for an explanation. Everything that was happening seemed to her to be some kind of nonsense, and she couldn't make sense of it at all. Frank began to make confused excuses. "Nancy, you've got it all wrong. That Miranda must be kidding. She's a total badass, top model, and she's trying to pin someone else's baby on me? It's okay, I'll find her and I'll expose her. We'll take him to the children's room of the police or to the orphanage right away. Let them look for the negligent mother themselves." Nancy pulled the child closer to her and said sternly, "Get the cradle and let's go to the apartment. We'll find out who's the mother and who's the father. There's nothing to shout at the whole staircase. In the meantime, go to the drugstore and get bottles, formula, a pacifier, and whatever else you need. He'll be hungry soon. What are you going to feed him, croissants or soup at 6 months?" Frank switched to shouting, "Nancy, wake up. We're not feeding anybody. I'm sure it's not my baby. Why do we need all this trouble? Don't be silly." The girl parried vigorously. "You wake up. What if it's yours? And now you're just going to take your son and put him in a home. Who are you after that? We need to do a genetic test to know the truth, and then we'll see." A confused Frank rushed to the store. Nancy got busy with the baby. She undressed the baby, changed the diaper, and cradled him in the stroller. Something unimaginable was going on inside her. It was almost like that time with the kitten, only 100 times stronger. Pity, tenderness, and love displaced the anger that had come over her at first. Chuck was looking around and humming, wiggling his little fingers and smiling. The girl was perplexed. What kind of mother is that? How can you give up such a treasure and go abroad? Have you no heart at all? Frank didn't share Nancy's concern and stubbornly wouldn't go near the baby. He agreed to the examination just to get rid of someone else's baby as quickly as possible. He was 100% sure he had nothing to do with the baby. So why all of this? The girl took a week off and sat with Chuck all the time. She thought she was enjoying her time with the baby, and she didn't even expect that from herself. When the results came back, everyone was shocked. It was 100% related. Nancy was indignant. So you had nothing to do with it, you say? Did you have an affair? How's that, Frank? What do we do now? The guy just blinked and made excuses. I don't know where to look for Miranda, really. We only had one time with her. Just a momentary pleasure. I don't even know her phone number, last name, and address. But that's all right. I'll ask my friends from my last company. We'll find the rascal. Let her take him. Nancy was shocked. Frank, how can you do that? If she threw him under your door just like that, how much do you think she needs him? Will she love him, raise him properly? Why live for her? Come to your senses. You're a father. Which means you have to be just as responsible for the baby as the mother. The guy panicked. What do you suggest? He's going to live with us all the time. What a hassle. Constant sleep deprivation. Lots of problems. Why would you want to do that? You don't have anything to do with this problem, do you? At this point, the girl could not stand it any longer and answered sharply. I'm your wife, in case you haven't forgotten. And now I have everything to do with you. I didn't think I was marrying such a cruel and callous man. Just so you know, I won't leave Chuck. And it's not his fault his parents turned out to be jerks, and there's no place for him in their lives. It's either you file for paternity and we're still a family, or we get a divorce. I'll take Chuck and leave. I'll adopt him. Is that clear? Frank shouted in his heart. You're crazy. Blessed. He slammed the door and ran away. Nancy cried. This was not how she'd imagined their life together. They were barely used to getting along, and now Chuck. The baby grunted and whimpered, awakened by the screams and scolding. Nancy took him in her arms, kissed him on the nose, and said affectionately, Silence, silence, my darling. Sleep, sweetie. I won't leave you for sure. We'll live together since your daddy doesn't care about you. Frank ran to his parents and began to tell them about the incident. Richard's face changed. His mother groaned and clutched her heart. Then he jumped up sharply from his chair and answered, You're a real scoundrel, son. I didn't expect that, of course. Nancy's a clever girl. She's the wisest girl I've ever met. I'm proud of my daughter-in-law. Mind you, I'm on Nancy's side. If you make a child, be good enough to bring her up. Why don't you just run like a cowardly hare into the bushes? It's up to you. But if Nancy decides to divorce you, I'll support her and babysit her grandchild. You got it? Are you okay, Mother? The woman said quietly. Frank, the father is right. As it happened, it's not right to give up on your son. Don't disgrace the family name. Listen to Nancy. She's a smart girl. You can't lose her. But if you give up your family, you won't forgive yourself. There's already a child. It's small and helpless. And it's not your fault. Look at it this way. Any other girl in Nancy's shoes would have made a fuss and dumped you after that. And she'd have been right. But you're lucky that your wife has been kind, compassionate, and merciful enough to forgive you and want to raise your child. That's worth a lot. So think long and hard before you cut it off. You'll have to live with that later. Frank realized there was no support here, so he left. I decided to go to my favorite club, which before I met Nancy, I used to go to quite often. The party was in full swing there. Electronic music, dancing, disco, lots of girls and cocktails. My friends, seeing Frank, waved happily. Oh, hello. Long time no see. How come your wife let you go to the club? Let's party like we used to. Bartender, we'll have 4 shots, like always. Some glamorous girls with thickly colored lips began to hang around the boy, beckoning him with their charms, and Frank drank with his friends a couple of times and waited for the courage to set in. But he still felt homesick, missed Nancy, and wanted to go home desperately. Suddenly it dawned on him that this whole past life of his was tinsel. There was nothing real in it. Girls had absolutely no attraction to the guy. On the contrary, the image of Nancy, so gentle, with her natural beauty, immediately surfaced. The guy stood up abruptly, said goodbye to his old company forever, and left. It was nighttime when Frank quietly turned the key and entered the apartment. He peeked into the bedroom. Nancy was asleep on the edge of the couch next to a sniffling Chuck. The boy's heart ached with tenderness and excess of feeling. He covered his wife with the plaid, leaned over, and kissed her ear. Nancy jumped up. "Frank, are you back? Thank goodness. I was so worried. I called you 100 times, but the phone was out of range. Have you been drinking?" The guy said quietly, "Forgive me, princess. I was very wrong. And I realized that I only want you. And Chuck I will try to accept, love, and bring up worthy, because he is my son. I just need time to get used to him. You are the best and wisest wife I have." Nancy even cried from such sincere words. She felt Frank was speaking from the heart. They hugged each other and quietly went to their room. In the middle of the night, the baby cried, and Nancy immediately jumped up and ran to him. Frank kept waiting for her to come back. Then he couldn't stand it and went to see what was wrong. The picture was adorable. Nancy was lying next to the baby, stroking him, and feeding him from a bottle. He was smacking funny, his cheeks puffing up. Frank lay down beside them and said quietly, "You hungry, son?" And he gently touched the little finger. Chuck immediately grabbed it tightly. That warmth of the tiny hand turned something in the boy's mind. He smiled and quietly added, "I'm your daddy, we're together forever now." Soon Angela was deprived of her parental rights, and Frank and Nancy adopted little Chuck. Gradually, Frank became accustomed to and genuinely loved the child, and could no longer imagine how they had lived without him. Nancy turned out to be a great mommy. She cared and took care of Chuck very reverently. Parents on both sides were supportive of the boys, and vied to babysit their grandchild. Even Nancy's sick father seemed to cheer up. You can't mope when you have a baby in the house. The 3 years flew by like a day. Life had long since returned to normal. Chuck went to kindergarten. Nancy still worked at the passport office. Frank worked at his father's firm, only not as a manager, but as head of sales. With all this trouble, Nancy did not immediately realize that she was pregnant. Tired quickly became and lost appetite. Who doesn't happen? Only when our heroine almost fainted in the middle of the office, the woman sounded the alarm and went to the doctor. The gynecologist stunned her. The ultrasound showed twins. Nancy was very frightened. Oh my God! How can Frank tell? It took him a long time to get used to Chuck, and there are 2 more on the way. Oh, he'll run away for sure. How am I going to be alone with 3 kids? Nancy dragged it out to the last minute. Didn't say anything to her husband, and only when it was simply no longer possible to hide it did she make up her mind. "Frank, don't you notice anything? Take a good look at me." He looked at Nancy in surprise. "So I gained a little weight. I got a tummy. Is that what you're upset about? Come on, it looks good on you." Nancy laughed. "God, you men are so clueless. Frank, I've been pregnant for a long time. We're about to have twins, a boy and a girl. I was just afraid to tell you. You might run away. I know you." Frank was stunned. "How are the twins? You and I are finally going to have 2 babies. And you didn't say anything." "No excuse, Madame Livingston. This is great. I love Chuck and I will love our babies. Don't you worry. If we can't do it ourselves, we'll hire a nanny. We have to tell our parents right away. They'll be so happy." Nancy exhaled a sigh of relief. Woo! It won't run away, thank God. Despite the twins, Nancy had a very easy pregnancy, and Mike and Maria were born just ahead of schedule. They were so tiny, funny, shriveled up like old people. Nancy, exhausted from childbirth, was doozing in her room when she heard outside the window, "Nancy, I love you. Thank you for the babies. You are the best." She smiled and waddled to the window. There was Frank waving happily, Chuck gesturing at her, and her parents standing in the distance. Everyone was giving her kisses and signs that she was doing great. It felt so good and warm. She thought to herself, "Here's a joker and a joker for you, beloved Frank. Now a solid man and father of 3. How wonderful that I met him." And she also remembered Thomas very often, for it was with his light hand that Nancy's life changed like a fairy tale, both at work and in her family. Frank was jumping for joy under the windows of the maternity hospital. He wanted to shout to the whole world, "People, I'm a 3-time dad. I have the best family ever." He tossed the laughing Chuck up in the air and mouthed, "Chuck, Mike, Maria, our whole family.